Okay, so what we want to do is we want to just break through this vertebrae just here. But before we do that, we want to follow this rib, the final rib, down along there towards that vertebrae. So we're going to cut ever so slowly, don't rush it, all the way down to that rib, and then we'll get to that point there. What we'll do then is with you use a basher, I'm just going to use my hand, and I'm going to cut straight through. Okay, and now we have the best end rack. Okay, so before we take these vertebrae out, to make it a little bit easier, because if you use the saw at this moment in time, you're going to start shredding on meat. So if we just remove this bit of undermeat here, it will just allow us to get closer to the vertebrae and make it a lot easier for us to saw. Then what we're going to do is stand up the rack in this position and angle our saw down to take the vertebrae off, making sure that there is no part of the saw that will be going through the eye of the meat. Concentrate on this side as well as this side. Very carefully, don't rush it. And stop. Once you get to that position, you're going to remove the vertebrae. Before we start to make the rack of lamb, what we need to do is do some additional trimming. This will involve removing the back strap from the back of the rack and removing the scapular cartilage from the loin. What we will do is just make sure ever so slowly that you're just going underneath the eye of the meat. Do not cut square. This will then go through the eye of the meat. We're just making sure that we're going under, and then we remove the gristle. Making sure that all the back strap has been removed. Then we will get rid of the scapular cartilage. Do not go into the eye of the meat. Ever so slowly, come across the one side and across underneath, and then what you'll be able to do is grab the cartilage, which will reduce the risk of you going into the eye of the meat. And there we have. Then you go underneath this and take it away from the bone. You will then have to trim this further later on. Then what we want to do is go in between the ribs, making sure that we clean the ribs as we go. There's so many ways you can do this. You can do this by having the rack at you and cut down towards the ribs and go either side, and then follow up with a nice round cut there. And we're just going to take off this final piece. As you can see, I've already done all of the rest of them. Now we're at the stage where all the meat is being removed. We need to make sure that this is adequate for trim and these bones are nice and clean. Once we have completed cleaning the ribs, all we need to do now is separate to create a guard of honour. So in my situation, there are 7 bones, so I'll make a 4 and a 3, just nicely cutting in between the ribs. Once this is complete, what you will need to create is a guard of honour, which is the interlocking of the rack of lamb, which creates that. Once the guard of honour has been created, separate these and cut these into cutlets. Easily just going in between the ribs and cutting down, making sure that you are not feathering the meat as you are cutting down in between these ribs. From there, you will have to display these on a tray, as easy as 1, 2, 3, and the final 4th. From the lumbar section of the loin, the aim is to create lamb chops. By doing this, we need to go in between the vertebrae and cut through them. You would have a chopper and mallet. I'm just going to cut them with my hand. For the advice, I would crack all the vertebrae first and then cut accordingly, because the smaller it gets, the more difficult it will become. Once that is complete and you've done all that, we're just going to cut down each of the chop, and the same as the chops before, you will display them accordingly. Like so.
So, with your leg of lamb, what you need to do while you're taking the shank off, run your thumb along and there should be a dip. You can see in there. That's where you want to be putting your knife in to make the cut. So with a leg of lamb here, what we're going to do, we're going to go through this joint here and take off the shank. Then eventually we'll take off the top side, take out the femur bone and all the other muscles. So first of all, putting your knife just in here, go straight down. You should go through a joint like that. You can see in there. Then a nice straight cut, straight down. It can be a bit wobbly sometimes, you can see. And come down to remove your shank and the rest of the leg. So now we're going to take the top side. What I normally do is I come under here, then you've got your knife on your bone already. You can see exactly where the seam you're meant to go down. So you start here, come in, making sure your knife is on the bone, come straight out. If you open it up a bit, use your hands a lot, you don't need to just use the knife, use your hands, and you can see exactly which seam you're meant to be going down. It should just fall away. Just follow that all the way out and cut straight down. So you've got your top side. So now we're going to take out the rest of the femur bone, which starts here and ends there. So what you need to do, start at the top, come down and expose the bone. You can see it comes out here. This is where the kneecap is. You just follow that down. I always expose this end first because then you've got a handle. So moving it around again. And exposing this end bone. Then you've got a nice safe handle to hold, and then you can just come around here, taking all the meat off the bone, pulling it away. So then you have your femur bone. So then finally, just to separate the knuckle from the silver side, there's a seam that you can follow. You don't need to really cut, just use the tip of your knife just to tease it open. So all we just need to remember now is to take out the kneecap. So just have one straight cut down, making sure you leave as much meat as possible on the joint. So you take out the cap, and then you've got a nice knuckle muscle here. So we've got our four sort of main components of the lamb leg here. So we've got the silver side, which we're going to trim up for diced. We've got the knuckle, which we're going to do as a small roast, and then the top side, which is going to be our steaks, which need trimming up, and then we're just going to French trim the end of the shank. So on the silver side, you've got the chunk of meat here, which is actually the shank still, so you want to take that out, and that just comes out naturally. And then you've got a chunk of fat here, which always is a good practice, once you've taken it out, to chop into it to make sure you've taken out the gland. If you take out good cooking fat, and you haven't taken out the gland, then you've taken out good fat and you've still got horrible bits in there. So once we've kind of trimmed it up a little bit, we just need to remember to take off the silver side. Now this is a really horrible gristly bit and it's quite chewy, so you don't really want to dice that up with your nice stewing steak. So what I normally do, pop the knife in, make sure it's angled slightly upwards and bring it back. Then you're leaving as little meat on there as possible. If you do have any, just kind of trim it off and pop that to one side. You've got a nice big chunk here, and again, just bringing it back. So with the shank, what we're going to do is we're just going to French trim the end. So I normally do about a thumb width, and just do one straight down, spin it round, straight down the other side. And what I do, kind of lean it away from you so you're not cutting towards you. Come straight down, both sides, spin it round. Then you've got kind of like a little butterfly almost to hold. You just come straight down out there. So then you have a nice clean knuckle joint, and you can either use strings or trussing bands, but just kind of make sure that it's a nice easy joint. And I normally make sure if I'm using bands, put the knot underneath. If you're using string, make sure your knots are all in a row. Once we have our top side, best thing to do is weigh it first, just to see what you can where you can cut and how many steaks you can get from there. We want our steaks to be about 120 grams, so you can almost divide it into 4 where you think would be 120 and slice down one nice clean cut and weigh it.
So before we start any butchery on the shoulder of lamb, we're just going to inspect the primal to see if there's any type of contaminants. Physical, chemical, microbiological, we're all good. So, firstly, what we're going to do is remove the foreshank from the shoulder. By doing this, we're going to peel over this flap and cut down towards the knuckle. From there, we're going to make sure that all the meat is removed and crack that bone, and as you can see, the joint has been separated. And from that, what we're going to do is just remove that. Once the knuckle is removed, we're going to peel back the spider muscle, starting from this end and all the way over towards the scapular bone. You can do this with your hands, and you might just need a knife just to do the last little bits. As you can see, it gets a little bit tough here, so you can just peel that back. When you get to this bit, there is a seam that you need to make sure that you're following, and that is to go over the scapular bone. Don't go under, go over, and we're just going to follow it. And as you can see, the seam is just there. Just peeling that spider muscle back, but don't take it off. You will naturally fall onto the scapular bone until we get to this position here. Once the spider muscle is peeled back, as you can see, there's just a little bit of meat that just sits on the scapular bone there. We're going to butterfly that off, just so we can expose the scapula, so we can bone that out. Starting from the top and all the way down, we're going to cut towards the scapula and butterfly that open. And this will expose the scapula, which makes it easier for us to go down each side. Once the meat has been butterflied off from the scapula, the aim is to expose all the bone, just so it gives us a good guidance on where we need to go. So we just follow the edge of the scapula down there. Same again this side, until we can see where the bone is. There's a ball and socket joint here that connects the humerus to the scapula, and what we need to do is to break that ball and socket joint so we can get underneath each side. Did you see what I did there? I went in and tucked round. Then we're going to cut underneath the scapular bone, and as you can see, I can't go any further because there's a bone in the way. So we take it from the other side now, making sure when we're going under that, we're trying to leave as much meat as we can on the shoulder and not on the bone. This can become quite difficult, so take your time, don't rush. Once we get to that stage and you've got to the bone at the back that you can't go any further, what we need to do is go underneath the scapular bone. If we were to pull this scapular bone now, what would happen is that there would be a little bit of bone left in the meat. So only pull just a touch and then remove the rest with the knife. Making sure you don't make any holes in the shoulder. Once the scapula has been removed, the aim is to remove the humerus. By doing this, we need to aim our knife towards the bone and follow that bone all the way down. Be careful not to go all the way through, just enough so we can pop the humerus out from the other side. As you can see, I've still got a little bit more to go. Keep pushing, keep getting it underneath so it exposes that humerus, which gives it a bit of an easier way to bone it. Once we've popped it out, we need to remove the bone, and the best way to do this is the same as the leg of lamb, where we release one side of the bone and then use it as a lever to go the other side. Making sure, again, you are keeping the meat on the shoulder and not on the bone to the best of your ability. Take your time, don't rush. What we'll now do, once all the bones have been removed, is remove the big gland from in between the spider muscle and the shoulder. By doing this, as you can see, it's a natural seam, but you want to make sure this is removed, as it doesn't taste very nice. By doing this, we're just going to scoop, and I'm going to cut into the fat just to show you what that gland looks like. Can you see it there? We want to make sure that we're getting all of that gland out, and you can keep cutting until it all comes out. You're not all the time going to get it first time. Just make sure that all of it's out and you don't go through the other side of the shoulder. What I'll now do, once this is removed, is trim the rest of the shoulder. Once the shoulder is nice and trimmed inside, we just want to make sure that the back of this flap here, all the fat is removed. The reason for this is because if I'm going to roll this that way, I don't want to put that fat back into the shoulder, as it won't cook very well. So all we're going to do is just skim the fat off, just so we're exposing the meat. You don't need to do it all over, just a little bit. This lamb isn't very fatty and therefore doesn't require as much trimming as others. Once that's complete, we're going to roll the joint into a carvery using string. On the shoulder, we're going to French trim. Same principle as the mini lamb shank on the leg. We're just going to go around the bone and then remove. Try to make sure that you go underneath the bone film. This will give you a lot more cleaner bone. And now we have a French trimmed.
During your endpoint assessment, please ensure health and safety and food safety are priority. By doing this, please make sure the knives you are not using are safely away in your knife block and all debris is cleared from the work area using a cloth and bucket. Good luck.
Okay.